This is the deadliest underwater cave in the world. By conservative estimates, at least 200 divers have lost their lives here. Some were recovered and brought ashore, while others remain as skeletal remains forever at the bottom. The death of one particular diver was even captured in its entirety by his own camera. This is what we are covering today, the Dahab Blue Hole serial fatalities. The Dahab Blue Hole is located on the east coast of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, 8 kilometers north of the city of Dahab. It is clearly visible on satellite maps as a patch of water significantly darker blue than the surrounding shore. As we know, darker water usually means greater depth. The mouth of the Dahab Blue Hole is about 80 meters in diameter. The cave structure gradually narrows as the depth increases, reaching a maximum depth of over 120 meters. At 6 meters underwater, there is a rock wall known as the saddle, and at 52 meters, the saddle abruptly ends, revealing a massive tunnel called the Arch. The arch is 26 meters long, leading from the Blue Hole directly out to the Red Sea. Divers swimming through it feel as if they are in an underwater cathedral. The sight is truly spectacular. And this is also the location with the highest number of fatalities. We'll explain why later. After passing through the arch to the open sea, the depth drops from 120 meters all the way down to 800 meters. Because of the warm water, good visibility, and the almost total absence of currents inside, it has become an ideal spot for all types of divers. Counterintuitively, this perfect dive site has been dubbed the Diver's Cemetery. Inlaid into the rock wall by the shore are 14 memorial plaques in different languages, honoring those who died in the Blue Hole. According to public records, between 1997 and 2012, at least 130 divers died in the Blue Hole, averaging over 8 deaths per year. To date, the actual death toll likely exceeds 200. Behind these statistics, one legendary diver is always mentioned: Tariq Omar, known as the Collector of the Blue Hole. Omar first came to Dahab in 1989. He learned to dive in 1992 and became an instructor 3 years later. He was the first diver to reach the bottom of the Blue Hole, and still holds the depth record here at 209 meters. Since no one knows the Blue Hole better than he does, Omar is frequently involved in body recovery operations. According to Omar, he has lost count of how many bodies he has recovered, but his first recovery remains the most vivid in his memory. November 19, 1997. Irish divers Conor Oregon and Martin Gara, in order to challenge themselves, planned to dive inside the Blue Hole, find and swim through the arch at 52 meters to the open sea, but they never came back up. Omar later found them at the bottom of the Blue Hole, at about 102 meters. They were locked in a tight embrace. Neither had released their weight belts, and their regulators were out of their mouths. One person's tank was empty, while the other still had plenty of gas. Omar speculated that someone got into trouble at depth and began to sink uncontrollably. The companion chose not to flee alone but tried to grab and stabilize the other. But at that depth, the negative buoyancy is immense. The two simply continued to sink. Furthermore, they were using single tanks of ordinary compressed air, which is 21% oxygen and 78% nitrogen. In deep diving, this leads to two conditions: nitrogen narcosis and oxygen toxicity. Below 50 meters, the feeling of nitrogen narcosis is like drinking 4 martinis in a row. So much so that they never thought to ditch their weight belts. It's also possible that oxygen toxicity triggered a seizure, causing their regulators to fall out, leading to rapid drowning. Yet, tragedy struck again just a year later. November 16, 1998. 24-year-old Argentine female diver Barbara Dillinger dove into the Blue Hole with companions that day. Perhaps it was narcosis, or perhaps gas was consumed too quickly. Barbara, who became separated from the team while trying to cross the arch, suffered a panic attack. She then ascended in a panic, resulting in severe decompression sickness. Upon surfacing, her lungs ruptured due to overexpansion. To make matters worse, while Barbara was being rushed to the hospital in Sharm el-Sheikh, all 4 oxygen cylinders in the ambulance were empty. Despite her companions performing CPR throughout the journey, Barbara had no vital signs by the time they reached the hospital. She remains the only woman among the memorial plaques on the cliff. Unexpectedly, 3 more divers died in succession the following year. In 1999, while 2 Egyptian divers were in the Blue Hole, their dive buddy disappeared and died at a depth of about 70 meters. Some guessed narcosis, others thought it was suicide. To honor the Islamic tradition of burial within 24 hours, the 2 surviving divers forced a recovery dive the next day without adequate preparation. As a result, both died as well. One of them was a close friend of Omar. Seeing the friend's widow waiting at the shore every day, Omar couldn't bear it and decided to recover the bodies himself. He first dove to 70 meters using compressed air but found nothing. So, Omar specifically earned a mixed gas diving certification. Finally, after descending to 100 meters, he found all 3 bodies. There was another tragedy during this period. The exact time is unknown, only that it happened on a night with a full moon. A young diver named Steve approached his friend Marnie with a crazy idea: to turn off their flashlights and do a night dive in the Blue Hole. He naively thought the full moon would illuminate the hole, creating a charming scene, so they snuck into the water at night. After reaching 60 meters, they began swimming toward the arch. As prearranged, both turned off their lights. But it turned out that moonlight cannot penetrate the darkness of the arch tunnel. There was only suffocating silence. Steve and Marnie were close to each other, but in absolute darkness, they could see nothing. And they didn't know they had already left the arch behind. Finally, at some point, Marnie couldn't take it and turned on her light, only to discover to her horror that Steve had vanished. There were no bubbles, only a deathly silence. Finding a companion in such conditions is like finding a needle in a haystack. Marnie had to surface alone. Steve's body was never found, so another memorial plaque was hung on the cliff. Although these accidents prompted the Egyptian authorities to tighten regulations, restricting compressed air divers to a depth of 40 meters. In Dahab, it's easy to spend €100 to find a guide willing to sneak you into the arch. For instance, in April 2000, the most famous accident in the history of the Blue Hole occurred, because the entire process was recorded by a camera. To date, the video has nearly 10 million views. The protagonist of the tragedy was Russian diver Yuri Lipsky. Yuri met Omar an hour before entering the water, stating he wanted to dive to the bottom to break his own record. Omar learned that he hadn't dived for a whole year, and had never been trained for such depths. He wanted to reach 100 meters on his second day after arriving from Russia. Deep diving like this requires meticulous planning, so Omar warned him not to attempt it, and suggested he train with him for 2 weeks first. But Yuri only had 2 days for diving, and today was the last. He politely declined Omar's offer. According to Omar, after Yuri left, he found another guide and successfully convinced them to dive together. About 15 minutes later, that guide surfaced, but Yuri did not return, failing to reach her son all day. His mother realized something might have happened to Yuri. Commissioned by Yuri's mother, Omar spent several days searching and found the body at 115 meters. He was lying face down on the bottom, apart from a single tank. He had 12 kilograms of lead on his belt, and a heavy camera tied with a rope. His BCD, buoyancy compensator, had ruptured. After handing the body and equipment to Yuri's mother, Omar guessed the camera was ruined by the pressure at 115 meters, since it was only rated for 75 meters. To his surprise, the camera still worked, and it recorded Yuri's final moments perfectly. At 5:02 p.m. on April 28, Yuri began his descent. Everything seemed normal at first. By 4.5 minutes into the video, most of the light vanishes, indicating a depth between 50 and 60 meters. At 5 minutes, it is pitch black. At 5 minutes and 37 seconds, Yuri shows his dive computer to the camera, displaying a depth of 81.7 meters. The following footage shows the rocky bottom, but Yuri appears to still be descending, indicating he was on a slope. At 8 minutes and 48 seconds, Yuri shows the computer screen for the second and final time. Depth, 91.6 meters. At 9 minutes, the sound of Yuri attempting to inflate his BCD can be heard. Unfortunately, it failed. As his breathing rate accelerates, he begins to struggle and convulse, and the kicked-up silt swirls around. Though Yuri's face never appears on camera, his agony is palpable. Finally, Yuri throws the camera to the ground, possibly to gain a bit of buoyancy. The next shot jumps to 5 days later, May 3rd. The footage is likely the rescue team checking the camera. After Omar's analysis, the cause of Yuri's death was primarily severely excessive weights. Besides the 12 kilograms of lead on his belt, there was the heavy tank, camera, and battery. When Yuri was found, his BCD had burst, showing that when he tried to inflate it, it was already at full capacity. As for why he didn't ditch his weights, the reason is easy to guess. At that depth, using ordinary air easily triggers nitrogen narcosis, leaving Yuri only thinking to inflate the BCD until it burst. Omar later regretted this deeply, because it left a mother with the full recording of her son's drowning. He stated that if he had known the footage existed, he would never have recovered the camera. Of course, it isn't only divers using compressed air who die in the Blue Hole. November 7, 2011, Russian diver Igor Shallow planned a deep dive. According to his logs, Igor had completed 400 dives. His deepest record was 106 meters. This time, he intended to challenge 150 meters using mixed gas. Initially, Igor smoothly descended to the arch at 50 meters. But he didn't go straight to 150 meters. He stopped at 120 meters, his first mistake. Then, reaching 150 meters, he stopped again, his second mistake. Consecutive stops consumed precious time and gas, resulting in breathing difficulties due to insufficient gas at 130 meters during his ascent. He finally realized the severity of the problem, and began to panic ascend. However, an ascent from a deep dive must involve staged stops, to allow the body to gradually adjust to decreasing pressure. Ascending too fast causes inert gases in the blood to form bubbles, triggering decompression sickness. Although Igor fundamentally understood decompression procedures, the requirements for 106M and 150M are vastly different. In a state of lost control and panic, he rushed to the surface and immediately collapsed. The only hope for survival was a hyperbaric chamber, but the drive from the Blue Hole to the hospital takes at least 30 minutes. Everything happened too fast, there was no chance. Yet these tragedies have not stopped adventurers. Instead, as Dahab's fame grew, more divers kept coming to the Blue Hole. June 1, 2003, 23-year-old British diver James Smith dove in and never resurfaced. Omar later found his body on the slope between 80 and 100 meters. James's gear was unknown, but around 2003, divers generally used single tanks of air. Below 60 meters, as the wetsuit is compressed, the body becomes negatively buoyant. In a state of narcosis, he failed to inflate his BCD in time to adjust buoyancy, ultimately sinking into the abyss. Afterward, James's father set up a memorial plaque on the shore, inscribed with his son's favorite motto, "Don't let fear stand in the way of your dreams." James's mother still regularly visits Dahab to remember their only son. A year later, on August 24th, 35-year-old Russian diver Andrei tried to cross the arch to reach the open sea. He likewise never returned. Omar dove multiple times trying to find him, but the body was never found. During the final search, Omar found a compressed air tank and a rubber wetsuit at a depth of 170 meters. He speculated this was likely Andrei's equipment, and the body likely slid deeper into the open sea. January 10, 2007, 45-year-old Austrian diver Karl Marx lost his orientation while trying to cross the arch and died after running out of gas. After Omar recovered his body, another headstone was added to the cliff. Following that, on September 23, 2008, 43-year-old Swiss diver Stefan fell dove into the Blue Hole. He had no plans to cross the arch at the time, but under strong nitrogen narcosis, Feld mistook the deeper arch for the exit, and died from gas exhaustion during the crossing. His body was later found by Omar at the bottom at about 110 meters. May 9, 2009, German dive instructor Madeline also died near the arch. Witnesses found her already unconscious underwater. Her body was also recovered by Omar. The cause of death remains a mystery. The general consensus is still physiological stress or gas management error. It is easy to see. These victims were either young and at their physical peak, or experienced dive instructors. But they all had one thing in common: overconfidence. This is because the danger of the Dahab Blue Hole is not that it's too deep, but that it's too shallow. The limit for recreational diving is 40 meters, but the depth of the Blue Hole arch is 52 meters. Looking at the arch from inside the hole, the spectacular blue light from the surface looks so massive and bright. It's easy to create the illusion. The arch is right there, just a few kicks away. Simultaneously, under nitrogen narcosis, the diver's judgment is further impaired. At 60 meters, gas is consumed about 7 times faster than at the surface. Once you impulsively try to cross the 26-meter tunnel, you realize the gas you have is not enough. And by then, it's too late. But even the top diving experts are not infallible. July 22, 2017, the queen of freediving and world record holder, 25-year-old Italian diver Alessia Zecchini, decided to cross the arch via freediving. Freediving means diving without any underwater breathing apparatus, relying on a single breath hold. It requires the diver to overcome instinct, challenging physiological limits through mental and physical control. To ensure success, Alessia's partner and top instructor, 39-year-old Stephen Keenan, personally organized a support team of 12. Stephen was a world-class freediver from Ireland, and founder of the Dahab Freedivers Center. He had successfully freedived through the arch himself in 2016. One could say Stephen was intimately familiar with the process. The plan was as follows. After entering, Alessia would use the rope to descend, free immersion, to 52 meters in 1 minute and 5 seconds. Then, without fins, she would take 35 seconds to cross the 26-meter arch, then spend about 10 seconds moving to the ascent rope to meet Stephen. Finally, she would ascend via the rope in 1 minute and 5 seconds. The total dive time was planned between 2:40 and 2:50. Meanwhile, Stephen would begin his descent 40 seconds after Alessia entered. This way, at 1 minute and 20 seconds, he would meet Alessia exactly as she exited the arch. If needed, he would swim over and guide her to the ascent rope. As they prepared to ascend, Stephen would pull the rope twice, to signal the safety divers waiting at the surface to descend. They would observe Alessia's posture during the final 25 meters, ensuring the entire process went without incident. At 11 a.m. on July 22nd, after Alessia entered, the safety divers on the surface immediately began timing. Initially, everything was on plan. Alessia entered the arch in 1:05, exactly as expected. Normally, Stephen should have gone down 40 seconds after Alessia, but at the last moment, he suddenly asked the safety diver to delay his dive by 10 seconds, without giving any explanation. However, at the 50-second mark, Stephen seemed to spend more time adjusting his gear. The dive computer shows he actually entered the water 60 seconds after Alessia started her dive, meaning Stephen was a full 20 seconds behind schedule. Meanwhile, Alessia took less than 30 seconds to successfully cross the arch, over 5 seconds faster than expected, when she reached the exit at 1:30. Because Stephen did not appear at the designated spot, Alessia mistakenly thought she was still inside the arch and continued swimming forward. When Stephen reached the designated spot, he found Alessia already 15 to 20 meters away, and began to accelerate desperately to catch her. After about 28 seconds of sprinting at full effort, he finally caught up with her. Meanwhile, the safety divers at the surface couldn't get Stephen's rope signal, so they decided to dive down to check. When the safety diver reached 25 meters, he could already see that the end of the rope was empty, and no matter which direction he looked, there was no sign of Alessia or Stephen, because they were already out of sight. It can be inferred the safety diver was at least 50 meters away from them. Helplessly, the safety diver had to surface and inform the team of the bad news. On the other side, after Stephen met Alessia, the two adjusted their position and immediately began ascending face to face. But because Alessia was not wearing fins, her ascent speed was limited. Stephen paddled hard to help her float up, but without a vertical guide rope, their ascent direction inevitably had some angle, bound to increase the return time. Just about 10 meters from the surface, tragedy struck. Stephen lost consciousness on the spot due to reaching his limit. Being positively buoyant, his body began naturally floating to the surface. When the safety divers found them, they were at least 60 meters away from buoy number 2. Stephen was floating face down, unconscious. Beside him, Alessia looked vacant, showing no reaction to her surroundings. The diver shook Alessia while shouting to the companions for help. Regaining consciousness and remembering what had just happened, Alessia quickly flipped Stephen over to lay him on his back, only to find yellow fluid constantly flowing from his mouth. Despite the team's best efforts to save Stephen, they couldn't bring him back. Ultimately, after research, it was determined that Stephen suffered from wet drowning. A large amount of seawater entered his airways and lungs, causing alveolar damage and gas exchange obstruction. This is why yellow fluid kept coming from his mouth, leading to hypoxia, loss of consciousness, and eventually cardiac arrest. In 2023, this event was made into a documentary, but the film didn't explain why Stephen suddenly delayed his entry. Personal speculation. As a professional diver, he certainly knew the heart rate must be lowered before diving to conserve oxygen. Considering the two were in a passionate relationship, it's not ruled out that Stephen's heart rate was too high due to emotional fluctuations regarding her safety. To force his heart rate down and adjust his breathing, he had to make the decision to delay by 10 seconds. Ultimately, multiple coincidental factors caused an irreversible tragedy.